Hello again. I've done some more work with your project and I'm going to try to update you as quickly as I can with some of that information. It's not a whole lot, but before I get too carried away, because I'm ready to start working on another section above the first floor and at the rear. This particular film is focused pretty much on the front and the pathways, exterior pathways, updating those in accordance with the text that you had sent me over, and updating the levels of all those different outdoor spaces as well. Additionally, it covers some other things with regard to looking toward the north from inside the building. It covers some stuff in the kitchen, covers some stuff on the fireplace wall with regard to that fireplace wall and some of the different things that I encountered anyway, and where we are now with this project. Nothing's final, but I brought this along far enough that I can begin to address the area above the roof line, above the gutter line, both at the front and the rear. So this film doesn't do any of that, but I will try to be as brief as I can with it. So that was where we were the last time, and I didn't have additional windows on this north wall. We've been working with probably one of those smaller fireplaces, and that doesn't change a lot, that fireplace situation. But we'll get to that in a minute. We had these two plans on the second floor, 620A, which didn't add a dormer at all, and 622B, which added two dormers, one out at the front and one at the back, and joined this whole space. But I returned to 620A because I knew things were going to change with the chimney coming up here anyway. So I left that dormer out completely and started with 620A and got this second floor modified to what is actually existing up there, or something closer to what is existing up there. Wasn't too concerned about back in here, but I did kind of perfect this to the extent I was able, and this seems to agree with that. I don't know what this 39 7/8 dimension actually is, the depth of those dormers. Those were based on shingle coursing outside, but it should be within a couple inches. Later on, I do have to raise this roof an inch or two to make everything work on the first floor, and you'll see that in a minute. But that's what I ended up with then. It was something that's in agreement with what you had said, the 166 across this dimension here. And so that's what I ended up with on the final second floor, the second floor for now at 623A. And then I came down to work on this fireplace, and I just worked on this fireplace and went through everything that I'm going to show you in this film. But I did return briefly after I was done to see if the different information I had put together, how that would apply maybe to some other fireplaces. Because going in, I just searched 42-inch fireplace and started with really the first result, which, as it turns out, is one of the less elaborate models. It's less big, etc. So you can go larger, because I went back, before I made this film, I went back and looked at these, and obviously there are a million manufacturers. But because I had used a Majestic, the one I used was probably this Royalton. It was called the BE42 in any event, and it's one of the smaller models. All of them were 42-inch, but in terms of the viewing area, height and width, this was one of the smaller ones. I mean, it's 42 inches from here to there, the one that I've used for this design. And it requires a little more depth this way than what we had been showing. It requires 21.5 inches on depth. You can go larger than that pretty easily, and we'll be able to accommodate it. That might actually be, that looks pretty simple, so that might be the one I worked with. In any event, I wanted to look at one of these larger ones, and a big one like this. This is so tall, this is almost 8 foot tall, the whole unit, and that is a nice big tall viewing area. But that's a little too much for what we have to work with. But you could definitely get away with something larger than what I'm showing through this film. That said, some of the different things you want to do on that wall, including these windows, including your television and mantelpiece and hearth, may drive that decision more. Going forward then, so I designed with this for this BE42, and your chimney now on the first floor on that little porch is 84 inches wide. So, and at the second floor though, it's only that wide, 50 inches or so. I'm not sure we're going to be able to make our chimney smaller at the second floor. That said, I haven't done anything above this roof line, so I'm not positive about that either. And this is that pony wall where the top is siding and the bottom is brick. And this is just a quick view of that to see what space is between here. And this, remember, this is shown as a veneer brick, a thin brick that's painted, whereas this is full masonry around here that was covered in the last film. And so we have a lot of ground to cover yet with this whole thing, because maybe that has some stone on it or something like this. But I wanted to see how high I have to make this chimney, and as I suspected, they really want it above this peak, above the peak of the roof, particularly for where you're located. They want it above the peak of the roof. And there were different things to help with your airflow to make sure this thing will burn the wood. And they needed an extra 8 inches. We have 42 out here, but they needed an extra 8 inches because of this bend. And the way they've got this set up, we can't do that because we have a situation on the exterior where we really can't offset one of these walls to the right or the left, either one. So they wanted 8 inches on one side. So I've designed for 8 inches on each side just to keep that symmetrical with this bit here. Here was a different thing because outside it didn't matter which way it was shifted. For us it does, so I designed that with that 64 inches inside, which in terms of this film, that'll show you what really a wider than maybe is necessary chimney would look, and at the same time it will be okay probably if you go to a larger fireplace. As I said, I'll try to be brief, and this was these rules. These are just different caps that I looked at through here. I kind of like this one in a way for its traditional look, but I just showed a typical termination cap. And I'm showing it here at the minimum code requirement, which is about 19 feet from the top of the bottom of the hearth, and I brought that above the peak, the extra 2 feet above the peak, and I'm going to work with that regardless, because I want to make sure that fireplace actually burns for you. And so from out here, that was that code minimum height on the chimney, and that's bringing it up above the peak. But the next thing I did was updated this exterior according to what you said. All of these different levels come up to 0 like this. So everything up here is actually level with the inside. This porch and that one and this one. That's all level at 0, level with the subfloor, with the thresholds coming out on top of those. And then from this porch, I have it sloping down at 1/4 inch per foot here, and it comes along and it has some sort of slight slope upward here. And I was a little concerned about drainage. And somewhere along the way, what also happens in this shift here, besides raising that up, is the round columns go away and we go to a simple square column. And those round columns were 8 inches at the top, and I'm showing these finished at 7 1/4 each. So those can be done with a 1x8 if that's what happens. If that's just cedar wrapped or Miratech or something like this. Didn't cover this in that earlier film, but notice these windows over here in that breezeway. This is I changed that to a big picture window with flanking casement windows, and you might want to shift that up. I think it wouldn't hurt to have this picture window a little more narrow and these flankers a little wider, but that's up to you. And this is what I'm showing through these other 3 rooms, are these groups of 3 windows with the middle one fixed, and you can just have all of these, you know, opening to the west or to the north or whatever, if you like. But also having this is because this was much later on. I had horsed around with these 2 windows that are flanking the fireplace, but we'll get to that section in a minute. But to illustrate different things, it's kind of better from this angle here. And so I really liked your idea as it turned out, bringing this up. So now we'll get rid of those stone sills that I had been showing through there, and bring this all the way up. And then let your landscaping magic work. And I'm still showing the same stairs. That can be adjusted however it works out. Next Next I made those windows flanking the fireplace a little bit more narrow. They must have been 25 perhaps in this, maybe 29, and I reduced them to 21. And this is when I've also first replaced these columns, which are buried in the cement at the moment. Replaced those with square columns, and those were as thick as the other ones, 8 inches at the top, or 8 1/4 at the top, but those have been reduced, as I mentioned, to 7 1/4 finished at the square part. So I adjusted this brick, came back to this model to adjust that brick like the other one, and again, if you send over any color at all, I can show it on this, as accurate as it can get, I guess, on this. But this is how I've adjusted the brick and adjusted the photos. And I put your windows on the north wall of that kitchen. And at this point, I'm not sure how this roof has been handling it anyway with those steep pitches and those 5-inch gutters. But this next step upgrades the gutters first to 6 inches and most of the downspouts to 3-inch by 4-inch downspouts, just to effectively handle all the water out here. And you could have a downspout here, but in here, because if you keep the other thick one, the other 3x4 back here on this side of the chimney, if you keep the 3x4 back there, you probably wouldn't need a spout out here at all. If you do put a spout out there, that gets, it seems, a bit overdone. And there's the 2x3, and it's hard to see it in this, but I ultimately moved that spout over here and down against this brick wall. But if you weren't worried about asymmetry, the other side of this column is also, on the back side of this column that faces east, is also a good location and probably preferable to the conglomeration you'll see that I put together back here. And as a matter of fact, I'm positive here at recording time that that's what should be done on this other end of this, because I didn't make any photographs from this other corner, but I already know now I want that wall open. Additionally, I don't know if these windows were diagrammed on your thing like this in 2 groups, but if you want to represent something different here, that's fine too, because my feeling is that the downspout that I end up showing back here, in a couple of these photos anyway, should be moved to the other end of this, to this, the back side of this column here, like this one is on this side. But this side here, I started looking at different alternatives because I didn't want to really put one and not have that symmetry facing out here, but I really don't think that's a critical piece considering how the house is situated. Because when I looked at this, I'm sure this doesn't look great to you either. Probably you might have an entire landscaping plan for this already, in mind. When you look at this, I will come back to these sidewalks. These are not in their finished form, but when I looked at this corner here, with all of this living space out here, and you may well disagree, so ignoring the entire, everything up here, because that one hadn't been worked on yet. This was when I just finished this and the columns. And it seemed to me that, particularly with this curve down here, because I don't think a square joint would work at that location. So particularly with this curve down here. And then possibly some more landscape magic brings that up where it's just a one step down, but there's enough space here, you could be flexible enough for 2 or 3 risers down if you want something that rigid, made of concrete, etc. At least it would stay there. But that's what I'm showing for the moment, and tell me if that should be taken out. And all of these, this concrete actually comes into here, and there's a threshold, like you can see under here. So next, though, adjusted these pathways up here a little bit further. And added this one I have sloping down 1/4 inch per foot to about here, and this I have sloping down less than that. And this curve actually slopes as well, slopes up, according to my best adjusted guesstimate of where these elevations are. But this is the actual plan that I'm showing right now, is these 84-inch curve, 84-inch radius here, and I believe this is a 44-inch radius here. And then I thought this was a lot of busyness going on in through here, and so I made those windows a little shorter, and you can see here, this is where this roof comes up an inch as well because of the situation I ran into a little later in the film. Those windows come up and this sill just becomes continuous with the windowsill, whether they're narrow or wider. And we'll be covering a little bit of that later in the film as well. Once I had put that in for the moment, I did work on these sidewalks, and it looked to me like this point here was maybe a couple inches below zero. And we know that the front porch wants to be at zero, and everything over there wants to be at zero. And it looks like in this diagram, in this early, what I thought was this was almost at zero, it's almost already level. So you could actually sink a level sidewalk all the way into the ground. And I didn't show that because I was a little worried about drainage back, but obviously drainage and all that could be handled back here in the corner. But I did not show a really raised thing where you build out the landscape in front of that as well. But that can be easily done. What I ended up showing is shaped like this. This was the shape, and that's actually 88 inch, and this goes on to become 44, and these are both 88 inch radiuses here. But you come more or less level across here and slope up all the way to this door at about 1/10 inch per foot. You slope down to here and then back up at 1/4 inch per foot. But I did not get a chance to show that just as all one platform all the way across there. I had it kind of following the land a little. And that was because initially I was kind of a little worried about drainage, but as I said, I really don't think it's going to be a problem. This is pretty much where your grade is right now, up to the top of those tops of those window wells that have been built on top of a couple courses of brick. And as you can see, this is sloping down from the front porch and then back up to this porch here. The slope is slow. It's just a very low slope in the first place. And so if you bring your grade up to the bottom of this 6-inch thick slab, 6 inches at the edges anyway, 6-inch slab here, and you bring, even if you keep this grade level across here with what it is at that corner, bring that across level, you can see this becomes the low point back here. And I don't know if you can I don't know that much about landscaping. Maybe that can all just be filled in however you like with the appropriate drainage, particularly now that we're handling these downspouts. And this film really doesn't show, and this photo doesn't show enough, but I'll get rid of this clunkiness and put it out on the face of this column here, because I think even though we have this break with the roof, it's better if this wall is just one uninterrupted surface across. That's my feeling. And this was where I had to raise that roof a little bit inside, or raise that planes of the roof, because and I don't know exactly how this is framed here. I think there is probably a plate here that this comes down on, and maybe they just notched that out far enough that I could have left that roof down, but I did end up moving it up an inch, which is insignificant, but that's what I had to do to make it agree with what I was seeing. And then I began to look at this area here and some of this other stuff through this next section, I believe. And so right now I'm showing these 2153. So in this photo, this is the ones that come down and are part of that continuous sill around here. So 21 wide and 53, and those are in inches. And there's about 4 feet. You can see this is going over to the inside. There's 4 feet here, and there's 5 feet from here over to the corner of these pony walls. But we can't shift this unit in here. This has to continue. For one thing, it has to line up with the dormer above. But coming inside then, and here's why I don't think we can make that top of that chimney any more narrow, and that's not going to be, probably is not going to be part of the design, but nothing's been done up there yet. But looking inside then at these two areas here, I guess first at the kitchen, at the height of these windows, at these kitchen windows. This is the countertop. I'm showing a countertop level here, and this is the standard 4-inch backsplash. A lot of people aren't even using backsplashes these days, and they just run their tile all the way down to the counter. And sometimes they run the tile all the way up. I don't know what your plan is with this, but whatever it is, these windows have to be accounted for and how those are going to be integrated into the countertop and the backsplash. Here they are with a simple sill and no apron underneath like these here have, and are taller. And then I pull them up some because they're going to require you to have some outlets along here, and if we have them at Pella's next size lower, that's going to be a tight squeeze to get outlets in there, because I'm already a little concerned that we're going to be able to align these interior door heads and get all these door heads and window heads aligned and integrated with the freeze board outside that's a part of this. But that's what I showed in the kitchen, and that's things to think about. And I just now looked, and I can see very faintly in this copy that it says all glass. And everything, I mean, you are showing wall cabinets on that wall, but it says all glass. And so those windows, as I'm showing them, they do not need to be in that grouping like that. Oh, I see here on the right side it says window, window, window. So a group of 3 on the porch, and then the left side all glass. And I don't know if we could get a group of 4, for example, on this wall with the structure outside. We'll look at that in a minute, and I didn't review that for this film. But that was this bit here, and just ignore this baseboard that's coming where it's not supposed to be down here. Looking though at the fireplace wall, I want to talk about a few things with this. Showing the hearth 17 1/4, a normal chair is 18. So I'm showing that at 17 1/4, and again this is with that BE42 fireplace model. And so their viewing area is 21 inches high essentially, and they require the bottom of this bit here to be at least 4 inches above, you know, the non-flammable surface. So if we do that, and this mantelpiece, I'm showing it 15 from their requirement down here. The requirement's actually 12. So they can come down like that, and that puts the mantelpiece at 57. And then we get a TV up, and this is only a 55-inch TV. There's obviously room for, it looks to me like all the way up to a 70-inch TV up here, with that center going up maybe a couple more inches. The center's at 78 now. You do have a long, deep viewing area, so probably the TV becomes larger still. But I was wondering about these windows. I looked at these windows next, and I just kind of looked at a few different things with regard to them. And this height that I'm showing here is the ones that are, you know, in line with these sills out here, and I kind of like that look from outside. But I'm not sure about, and I'm not saying that it's displeasing, but that wall is really busy right now. And so I had horsed around. Now here I bring them all the way up completely above that stone sill out there, because this intermediate size is, if you went with this intermediate size, you would just raise this sill up and still keep that contiguous, I believe. But I was just experimenting with that, more or less, seeing what might actually work out there. And this, which is the smallest, 17 by, those are probably 17 by 29 maybe, and that's what it is out here. And maybe these awnings windows work better. I went down to 21 and went down all the way to 17. So I would have pushed them out a little like this. That may or may not be something you had in mind. And I like that or this actually at the end of the day. But you could see that if you want a bigger fire, you could bring this down, this hearth thing. A lot of times these are only 8 inches off the floor, and you have to, I'm just showing this as this painted brick, but you have to describe what this base is going to be for that hearth. But you could bring that down another 10 inches and do some, gaining either for the fireplace or for the TV or something like that, if you didn't want people to be able to sit on that without having to bend their knees. Otherwise, maybe it's brought down to 8 inches. Even 12 would give you some more room. And I don't know how that impacts the balance of these windows on this wall. And additionally, and it's not covered in this film, and it's still yet to be looked at with regard to that wall, you guys haven't even said, but there's going to be some sort of fireproof material, and perhaps this wall, particularly if you want a little bigger firebox, maybe this wall projects into this room some to provide that deeper firebox, and maybe to provide a separation for you to wrap this whole thing in stone or something like this. But describe that to me along with product if you would like, and I would develop that a little bit more. My guess is you want a little bigger firebox, so that means it's going to have to be pushed in maybe and out. Either way, let me know and it can be done, but this was a review of that wall. And I probably prefer these larger windows from out here, to be honest. But I think that is it. That is it for this film, and the reason I stopped is because I knew once I began to look at how we were going to do this, because that rear roof structure is not actually going to be workable as I'm showing it with the 212 pitch. The shed roof would work, but that pitch would be, you'd be into either an unwarranted shingle laid on 112 pitch or some other membrane type roofing on that back pitch. But I'll be exploring a variety of things, and I'm eager to do that. So that's why I actually brought this film to a close here. Okay, actually, not to stretch things out, but I did a few things from this other angle that seemed like they were appropriate for this film, dealing with the dormers over there. And then I developed 2 different alternatives for dealing with these dormers, because all this aluminum is coming off and this crown mold is going to come off. Presumably this crown mold is coming off completely over the whole building. So the next thing I did, and I'll just run through these quickly, was develop 2 alternatives for this little cornice treatment here that works with what you have there. I think will work with what you have there. And this is what they amount to, really. This is about 5.5 inches of exposure here. This is a 1x4. So with this alternative, it uses this 1.5 inch high this way, T-style drip edge down the gable and back the eave. And that 1x4 that comes down the gable also runs back the eave, as does this 5.5 inch piece. So all those pieces run back the eave. And the other side, same T-style drip edge like that all the way around, same thing, except this is run on a square cut instead of a plumb cut. So that was just 2 different alternatives that I developed for those 2 dormers that I thought could work. Then those corner boards are widened out to 3.5 from whatever they are now, which I think is closer to 3. And the window is adjusted to actually palisade windows, which is going to be 17 wide by 35 high. The actual frame itself without the casing, which is like that size, that standard palisade. And it looked to me like there might be room in there. I don't know this because I don't know what this dimension is exactly. But it looked like A person could entertain using a wider window up there, but I didn't think that was going to help us in any real way, and whether it was doable or not. So I reverted to the standard Pella 17-inch wide unit, 17 by 17, 34 wide. And here are the two cornice treatments here that I wanted to consider. And this one's perhaps just a little simpler to be done. I don't know. This is that with that Pella 1735 twin unit, and then I went to a 5.5-inch lintel style head on that with a drip edge, and possibly just the 1.5-inch sill down here, and that would have to be wrapped with aluminum to match whatever this paint is, or something close to that, because it didn't really look good when I did that sill in black like the window, which would be a more standard aluminum color. But it might be possible also, if you were interested in something like that, if you wanted to create this higher look, it might be possible, depending on what the dimensions actually bear out there, it might be possible to go to that taller Pella window size 1741 twin unit. So when I adjust the cornices where they both are the same, and then all of this crown molding that was down here, all of this crown molding here and here and this stuff along the bottom was all replaced with straight 1x4. So that's what I ended up with after working with that side for a little while. This is where this side is now. I left those windows short. These are both Pella size units. Oh, the other thing that happened, and this shows a few of these different things that happened over here. And one of the things I did was make sure I adjusted the rest of these windows to actual Pella standard sizes. And I started with that breezeway, which apparently is going to have to be a little shorter. And what would probably happen is that that sill would stay lower and a frame expander would be put on the bottom of this window here. And then I made this sidewalk level, and this landscape belies that. But I made this level, well, it slopes up 1.5 inches or so to here, and then believe it or not, it doesn't look that way from here. There's a little glitch right here, but this is all level across here. The next thing is those changes where this was, all these stuff was changed to 1x4 at all of these various corners. I missed some here, but that's picked up in a minute, where all that crown mold goes away, and that just becomes the 1x. And now this photo shows the taller, those 41-inch high Pella units. And then this window, this garage window with all these twin or triple units across here, I just felt like that was a little wide. It does cost an extra window unit. And the other thing is, just I played around with this here just so you could see, if you horse around with changing the height of those windows, if you mix that up in the kitchen, if you mess around with changing the height of those windows in any way, that works as well. Next, you can see I changed these little windows to Pella sizes. These up here that are into the attics, those are changed to Pella sizes. And the regular 3.5-inch casing and 1.5-inch sills are put on those with 3.5-inch lintel style head with a drip edge. And that was how this shaped up with these shorter 36-inch windows in the dormers, 35 actually. And then these are the two different dormer cornice treatments you can see here. The square cut, and I had shied away from that square cut because at first, one of the reasons I wasn't even going to show it was we're not going to be able to create that. I suppose a person could if they were inclined to, but that would only happen at these dormers. That situation, you wouldn't be able to create that at these other ones without a lot of headache. But that's the change at the dormers there. And I can go with either one of those as well. I almost kind of prefer this, giving them a little bit more power, but I don't know with the tall windows. So that's what I ended up with on that facade there. And then the only other thing I did for this part of the film, and I promised this time around, is from this other angle, where the only thing I intended to do was make an adjustment here. I don't know, this was earlier and I had this shifted right here. You can see the shift instead of being smooth like this one that just comes back. So that was the only thing I intended to do on this end, just pull that out, but you can see the new 1x everywhere. But then that led to, I mentioned earlier that this room was not going to be 8'4", and when I looked at a section view it was even worse than I thought. So at least for this film I'm going to take a little look at this rear structure and see what I can do with this roof and accomplishing a higher ceiling in here. And so looking at a section through it, this was how bad it was, where we actually had roof slope down here in the room even when we built that room at 8'1". So I wanted to raise the room up right away because I feel like that should probably be the same height as the rest of the rooms on that floor, just so it doesn't look and feel too much like just an add-on at the back. And that left me with this, and I knew at that point probably if we use this shed roof arrangement, the insulation in here would have to become a spray foam, a spray closed cell foam, to get that up to the R38 over the wall at least, and they want 48 or 49 over the whole thing. So maybe that whole thing is just sprayed off, because otherwise we're not going to be able to accomplish with this shed roof, we're not going to be able to accomplish a 212 pitch. I was able to raise it up though. With that precept of spray foam insulation, where we don't need insulation baffles and high insulation here, because this is only a 2x6 ceiling joist running across here. And that, obviously that helped the inside, and I think that has to be the starting point at that rear, is have that the same height as everything else. And you can see right here how that lifts us up well off of our frieze from around the house, the rest of the house. And this frieze board here, this lifts us substantially up off of that. And so I don't know whether that goes away and something else is done here or an extra piece is added, but I think we might have to consider something like this, at least take a look at something like this, just because I already made some photos of that front with that front dormer extended to the back side of the chimney. It doesn't look very good, and I'll show you it eventually. And I don't think adding another same size dormer out there on the left will help, but I will show that to you, because I still don't think this is ideal here, this low slope roof back here. Just from a whole house perspective, I think this would be better, even if this is just empty sided space here with no window or anything access from the room. But my offhand feeling is that whether this is trussed or stick built, there would be a window back here from that same room. Oh, one thing to consider also is I have these windows going every which way in terms of which way they open their venting. So kind of figure that out in your head, which way you want those to vent. Now I have them all opening where they open, where the first opening is at the west. And I transposed that out here, and we wouldn't do something like that out here. But as I said, that dormer behind, I'm not sure whether both of those dormers might have to go, which compromises that space substantially inside. So that's another consideration. But out here, we might be able to hide the dormer out here with a structure, maybe something like this, where it kind of integrates with the dormer. I don't know. But that, this time I can promise you, and it's not going to be a lie, that will be explored in the next section, which won't be very long at all, because I'm interested to see how that develops, or how that could be developed. Nevertheless, here is the result of just getting that to a 212 and that room back there to 8'4", like the rest of the house, from this angle here, and adds casing and a window head to this window here. And the way that's kept at 212, it's just pushed really close to that dormer. As you see, it's all metal. It'd be flashing running right up to the bottom of the dormer. But that does maintain a 212 pitch at that rear slope. So that is it for now. Thanks very much. I'm sorry I just kept delaying this and adding to it.